Welcome again to episode 8 of An American Journey, where Julian and I try and talk about all things to do with America. In particular, this week we're looking at drive-in movies. Julian's going to give me a guided tour around Philadelphia, and we're going to be continuing our series on the US education system and how it differs or compares with the UK education system. This week, and those of you who've been listening will know this is part of a series, we're going to again look at the differences between the UK and the US admission process for those going to university. Because in the UK, it's A-level results time. And the thing uppermost in 80-year-olds is, how do I get to university where I'm going to go? Julian, over to you.
This week, in our 9-part series on education, we're going to cover 4 somewhat related topics. We will start with the question of whether the US education system is overtly US-centric, as we believed it was when we lived in the UK. This will segue into how US schools stream students into different levels compared to those in the UK. Thirdly, we will look at how the two countries test or assess their students. Finally, and this is almost topical in the week after UK students have received their A-level results that mark the end of their compulsory education, we will discuss the differences between UK and US admissions processes. Before I came to live in America, I had a view that most Americans were ignorant about what was going on in the rest of the world. I think that this was based largely on what I saw when I watched US cable news networks or read US newspapers. I made an assumption that education at US schools would also be heavily US-centric. I have to say that I have now substantially recalibrated that viewpoint. Of course, there are many Americans who have a US-centric view of the world. However, I also meet very many Americans who are both globally well-versed and widely travelled. I asked daughter number 1 whether she thought US schools were US-centric in their teaching.
It was not globally minded. So we learnt a lot about different cultures that probably I wouldn't have learnt about unless I'd done a history A-level or a religious studies A-level.
Mm-hmm. So you did 2 courses, didn't you? You did the year-long world history, which was a college level course, and you also did human geography, a year-long college level human geography course.
I also took a year and a half of optional world studies classes where we solved global issues via...
You solved them. Excellent.
Oh, yeah.
What? There's no global warming? There's no
we didn't. Sorry, I did solve homelessness in the Atlanta area at one point, but unfortunately, the US just didn't have the capability to act on my proposal to solve homelessness.
Essentially, you did 3.5 year-long classes of courses which were essentially not US-centric. They were related to other parts of the world.
I would say that that's definitely the case. I think that at high school is the first time these kids really get acclimated to the idea that there's history outside of the US that's not US-centric. Mm-hmm. So I would argue they start a lot later than those in the UK or elsewhere globally would start. But you do get, if you seek it out in a fairly good school district, a pretty well-rounded view of the globe.
I also asked daughter number 2 whether she thought US education was US-centric.
Extremely. I think that throughout elementary and middle school, I didn't really get the full picture of anything because they hid all of the nasty stuff that happened in the US, like things like Japanese internment. We would mention Native Americans and things like that, but they never really brought up like failures of America at the time, but I guess I could kind of say the same thing about the UK.
But when you went to high school, there was a lot of non-US stuff that you were learning. I mean, admittedly, you were streamed for college education, but you had a lot of non-US centric information and courses that you were studying.
Mainly to do with one of my teachers, world history. I have friends that didn't take the more advanced classes, and they didn't learn half of the stuff that we did. They didn't read the primary documents and dissect them and really get into what went wrong and the shortcomings of American society. But I could imagine that if I had gone my entire high school career without an accelerated class, I really wouldn't know any better. And I wouldn't know all of these things that are actually extremely important and tell us about America today.
But you did a couple of courses, didn't you? So you did world history, which looked at the history of every part of the world since man came to the planet.
Yes. Yeah, it was from hunter-gatherers to just after the Cold War.
And that wasn't US-centric really at all?
No, not really, because our teacher refused to use the state textbooks that we would get, and he made us buy our own. It's called The Human Record, which was an awful book, but it had a bunch of primary documents, and none of that is America-centric.
And you did a course in your first year at high school, which was also very international, which looked at human geography.
Yes.
That seemed to me a very international class, nothing really to do with America. It's to do with the way that geography matters and how one's geographical reference point affects your life. Would you agree that was a good course?
Yes, I would agree it was a good course. I think it was a good course to start the first year off with, because while it was very difficult, it explained a lot of things, a lot of gaps that people had in their knowledge. It sort of filled them in and explained why the cities are like they are and why, like, countryside education is not the same.
Mm-hmm. My estimation is that advanced level high school students in the school district we used to live in study more about what is going on in the rest of the world than almost any state school in the UK. However, this may not be the same for average students or students in other school systems. Here's daughter number 1 again.
My roommate is from South Georgia. Her father happens to work in the school system. Despite taking world history as well, she did not get the same kind of education about the world that I did. And so I think it does vary from
depends
part
on
of the
teacher.
state, depends on teacher, and really depends on just where you are and what experience the teacher has.
We ought to question whether the UK would have provided a global education or whether it would have provided a UK-centric view of the world. Here is daughter number 1 recounting what happened to her on her first day in a US school.
I learned, while being essentially teased by people, that the US used to be owned by Great Britain.
Right.
And I suppose I'd never really thought about it before that point because we'd never...
And you were never taught about it?
We were never taught about it. I mean, maybe I would have taught about it if I didn't have a lot of school switching, kind of in that beginning to secondary school years.
But in your first 12 years of education, which were in the British system, both in the UK and in Hong Kong, at no point in that system did you ever learn that Britain used to have control over most of the US continent.
Yes, but I can tell you what King Henry VIII ate for lunch every day.
This segues into the second question, into how publicly funded US and UK schools stream students by ability. I should probably give American listeners a history lesson on the last 50 years on streaming in the UK. In the 1960s, most school districts had 2 types of publicly funded schools. The most academically inclined British children attended grammar schools, and the rest went to secondary modern schools. Admission to these schools was largely determined by performance at an exam taken by 11-year-olds. Those who scored in the top 25% went to grammar schools. Those that did less well went to secondary modern schools, where trade skills formed a larger part of the curriculum. There were some obvious drawbacks to this system. A child might perform below par in the 11+ on the day of the test. Some children blossom a bit later than others, and many children relegated to the secondary modern system reported that they learnt at an early age that they were second-class citizens. Politicians from the UK's Labour Party, broadly but not entirely equivalent to the Democratic Party, held an ideological position that grammar schools reinforced class division and middle-class privilege. When they gained power in the mid-1960s, they ordered local authorities to convert these 2 types of schools into one school, what in the UK they call a comprehensive school. In the 1970s, Margaret Thatcher, then Conservative Education Minister, presided over the largest number of such reclassifications. However, by the time she became Prime Minister in 1979, her political party changed government policy, and since 1980, very few grammar schools have converted to comprehensives. Today, there are only 232 grammar schools in the UK, compared to the 1,500 or so in the 1960s. These are concentrated in a few counties in England and Northern Ireland. Students at these grammar schools are streamed by admissions policy and also by subject. The majority of school districts in the UK, therefore, now have only a comprehensive state system. Most of these comprehensive schools stream a little, typically in math and science. Regardless of your stream, however, they study the same curriculum. How does the US differ? At high school, or at least the one my children attended, there are 4 streams. The first is special education stream, for those who need a lot of help to learn. Historically, the UK has housed these students in special schools. However, in the US there is a principle that everyone should ideally be at the same school. These students will typically have their own classes, though in non-academic classes, such as chorus, everyone will be integrated. The second stream is on level, which is the standard required for graduation. The third stream is accelerated for those pupils who can learn at an accelerated pace. The fourth stream is often called Advanced Placement, or AP. These classes are at the same level as taught at a university. Students in our old school district are streamed for all academic classes. As this streaming was in place for most of junior high and high school, essentially they followed different curricula. Here's daughter number 2 talking about the differences in math.
There was a really big disconnect. Some of the kids that were taking the on-level maths towards the last years were still taking Algebra 2. Meanwhile, I had friends in my classes that were taking multivariable calculus.
You may be wondering how US students are chosen for each stream. Here's daughter number 2 again.
At the end of the previous year, the teachers look at your grades, and then they have a little conversation with you, and then they make a guess based on how they think that you would succeed. You can obviously drop down or wave up if you feel like you could compete at a higher level. It was basically up to the teacher's discretion, and in my experience, it was pretty hard to move up, because if a teacher had recommended you for a lower class than you would wanted to take, but then if you had made the wrong decision, you couldn't go back. They wouldn't let you go back.
But that was done by subject, wasn't it? So If you were not very strong at math, you could well be in a non-level class. But if you were super duper at English, then you would be in the college level class, and vice versa. Many people would be in a mixture of different classes according to their strength in each subject.
Yes. But, I mean, there were 2 different types of parents. There were the parents that think that you can do everything better than they did it, so they would wave you into every AP class. And then the parents who didn't want to ruin their kids' lives, so they would just make sure that they were all in on level, regardless of whether they could actually succeed in a higher level class.
Right. And which type of parent did you have?
The first one.
Excellent. Good parenting. Things don't always run so smoothly, though, as we explore in this story. Now, I seem to remember that you did spectacularly badly in a test on your first day at elementary school. Can you remember that?
Do you know what test it was?
It was on US history.
Oh, God. No, I don't really remember that, but I can't imagine that I did any type of well.
Remember it because when you went to the next school, you're generally in the high sets, but for social science, they put you in a low set because of this test you had done essentially on your first day at school in elementary school, where you flunked your test on American history because you didn't know the date of the American Revolution, or indeed that there had been an American Revolution.
Right.
And that result of that test sort of carried through.
Well, obviously one test doesn't make or break you, but me being behind when I went to the next school, and got placed in a lower class definitely affected all of my friends because I was in a class with people that maybe were a little less bright.
There is a marked difference between how the US and UK assess their students. In the UK, students are typically examined at the age of 16 and again at the age of 18 in countrywide tests. The university you go on to attend is dependent on the results of a few exams in the 3 or 4 subjects that you take at the age of 18. In the US, it is very different. With tongue firmly in cheek, I asked my daughters whether there was enough testing in US schools.
Enough? Yes.
Wait, there shouldn't be a bit more?
I mean, I did take a class. We took a pop quiz every single day. Is that?
So
Surely
you
that's
have a
enough.
quiz. So in the school day...
How do you learn anything if you have a 25-minute quiz every 50-minute class period?
Do you think there is enough testing in US schools?
I think that there is too much.
So how many tests or quizzes would you have that counted towards your GPA every week?
I think every day I would have like at least a quiz or a test that counted towards my GPA. And obviously it got a bit heavy at some points, and because the teachers love to assign because none of it was spread out and none of the teachers coordinated. So everything was kind of like, oh, well, you might have 3 tests in one day, and then the next day have 4 quizzes.
And was that stressful?
Yes, extremely. I think that you learned how to deal with the stress as you got older, but there were lots of second-year high school students that developed severe anxiety and depression just over how worried they were.
And what happened? I mean, obviously you can't do well in every test. When you had a bad mark in a test, what was your mood like?
Pretty bad for the most part, but I learned how to handle it, I guess, or just after it's done, I was kind of like, well, it's done, and I can't do anything about it now. But most people I knew did not have that type of perspective. They sort of just cried and then begged the teacher for extra credit, which is not something that was given easily.
What makes it more stressful for American high school students is that, at least in our school system, parents get to see, on an online system, every grade for every piece of homework, every quiz, and every test. Daughter number 2 is fairly phlegmatic about this transparency. What, you're saying that your parents can see all of your marks and your grades?
Yes, in high school and middle school and elementary school.
So that's every single piece of work you do? It's recording on a system?
Yes, it's an online system.
So I can see exactly what you've done on every single test, every single piece of homework?
Yes, and sometimes there are notes, too, for the parents to read.
Mm-hmm. What difference did that make?
I don't know if it ever really affected me because I knew you were going to check it no matter what, but I think that I had enough intrinsic motivation to just do it and to know that if things got bad, they would be able to see exactly where it went wrong.
Another daughter had a different perspective.
I think I probably would have reacted better had I not known the disappointment that was going to be, the hell that was going to rain down on me.
From whom?
Oh yeah, from whom?
What happens to students who don't pass these many tests? Daughter number 2 explains. If you failed a year, if you didn't pass your exams, then you weren't allowed up until the next year.
Yes, unless you did summer school.
Excellent, which was my next question.
Oh, okay.
So if you don't do very well, then you don't get promoted to the next year, and you just keep repeating the year until you pass it.
Yes.
Did you know anyone like that?
I did. I knew a few people that couldn't get past the first or second year of high school, but those people because I feel like the school that I went to, the teachers really cared and they wanted you to pass and do well. So even if you were borderline failing, they would do everything in their power as long as you tried. Because I would say you would have to try to get held back.
Okay. So you would be stopping trying if you weren't held back.
Yes, like completely stopping trying.
Now, you mentioned summer school earlier. Did you ever do summer school?
No.
And why is that?
Because I managed to pass and pass well.
Okay.
So
what type of person did summer school then?
I think that the people that I knew that went to summer school, they had an extremely low work ethic, and they had already decided halfway through the year that they weren't going to make it, so they gave up. But I feel like my friends, the ones that did go to summer school, they didn't have, like, strong families at home whatsoever. They either had an alcoholic parent or, like, a dad that wasn't in the picture or something like that they didn't have somebody checking their grades and monitoring.
It may surprise you to learn that some parents deliberately hold back their children from going to the next grade. Here's daughter number 2 explaining this special case.
It happens in between kindergarten and first grade, and so a lot of the kids repeated a second year of either kindergarten or first grade. But a lot of the reasons for that, it was mainly boys that were held back at that age, and it might sound really stupid from a British person's perspective, but some of the reasons were sometimes things like football. They wanted the kids to be bigger so that they would be better at sports, or they would be taller.
And roughly how many children were held back? Do you have an idea?
I would say like 5 to 10%.
You are probably wondering why all of these assessments are important. Here's table-kicking daughter number 1 to explain.
Because the way you're judged in US high schools is fundamentally quite different than the way that you are judged in the UK at secondary school and going into sixth form. Essentially, every single test and quiz and assessment, assignment, whatever you want to call it, every single speech, even your participation in every single class, counts into this final cumulative grade point average, which is a score that they give you.
And that's what is meant by GPA, is that right?
Grade point average.
Mm-hmm.
And that grade point average is what gets you into a university or not into a university, essentially. From the first day you step onto campus, I was 13 when I started high school. Every single assessment, assignment, day I was in class, participation, me putting up my hand, counted towards a grade that was essentially going to decide which university I was allowed to go to.
Here's how a GPA is calculated. You receive a letter grade for each class in each semester. An A is worth 4 points, a B 3 points, and so forth. Your final unweighted GPA grade is a simple arithmetic mean of all of your class marks at high school. An unweighted GPA of 4.0 is given to straight A students. A student with an equal number of A's, B's and C's would have an unweighted GPA of 3.0. There is something called a weighted GPA too. This gives more weight to accelerated and college-level classes. You will therefore hear of students with higher than 4.0 GPAs, like my daughters and many of their friends who have taken many college-level classes at high school. You may also heard of the dreaded SAT or ACT test. Here's daughter number 1 to explain what it is.
That's the standardized test. Obviously, there's massive grade inflation because the teachers can give whatever grade they want to a student. Mm-hmm. So you could have a school where they're paying money to the teachers to give everyone a grade point average of a 4.0, the highest possible. So they need some way of standardizing that. So they came up with this privately owned testing organizations, probably more like intelligence testing. It's not based on what you've learned. It's based on kind of your basic skills. That has a maths portion, a reading portion, an English portion. That's all on the SAT. And then the ACT has an additional science portion.
Okay. Most people are probably, British people have seen movies, or we've seen, Wonder Years or something where, little Kevin is sitting his SATs. Is that a big deal when you take that exam for many people?
Yes, and it's incredibly stressful, I think, because people think that the ACT or the SAT is the be-all, end-all for getting into university.
Okay. So what is the typical admissions process for a US student wanting to go into a US university?
So they're looking at GPA, that grade point average. They want to see as close to a 4.0 unweighted, or as high as it can possibly go. That's what they want. That SAT and that ACT, they want to see also as high as it'll go. Then the other thing is they will also look at the area which you come from and the things that you did outside of school. So are you a rower who went to the Olympics? Are you president of a club things like that. Do you do a lot of community service? They want to see people who are going to be good citizens at their university.
These differences between university admissions processes mean that there is also a very big difference in timing of when you learn which university you'll attend. I'll let both daughters explain. This week in the UK, the A-level results were announced, and children in the UK, or 18-year-olds in the UK, find for the first time which university they're going to be going to, and they start university next month in September. They take their exams in June. In August, they find out their results. September, they go to the university. And obviously, depending on their A-level results, that might depend on which university they go to. In the US, that works quite differently, doesn't it?
Yeah, so essentially, you submit your college applications in the fall semester of your senior year.
Okay.
So the only GPA...
So about a year in advance.
Yeah, a year in advance. So the only scores that matter are the ones before you start your senior year of high school.
Okay.
So only the first 3 years of your classes and your exams matter.
So the university will see your GPA for just your first 3, and they will see the SAT or the ACT score that you took in your junior year.
Yes.
Okay. When will people start getting offers from university?
I think I got mine mid-November was the offer that I ended up taking, and that was my first offer.
Yeah. The UK people in their last year at school, they're really busy working, they're stressing about their exams. In the US, if you've got your university place, I imagine it's a much less stressful experience for the average senior at high school.
Oh, yes. I mean, there's senioritis is what they call it for a reason. But that last year, you kind of know what your next step is. You've received either an offer from a university, and as long as you can keep your grades above a C in all your classes, you have no reason to work that much harder.
Okay. So that last year, that senioritis basically means, hey, let's just chill here. We don't have to work too hard in our final year.
Exactly.
So it's quite a big difference between the UK and the US system. What is senioritis?
Senioritis is just one of those moods that you get in that lasts the whole year, where you feel like you've worked yourself way too hard in the past 3 years, so why should you have to do anything for the last year? And especially after people find and commit to a college, they will just kind of give up and sort of breeze by, because as soon as they know that they've gotten that acceptance, all they need to do is not fail, and the school will still take them.
Give me some examples of what that means.
Senior year of high school, I'm pretty sure, according to one of my AP language teachers, that I didn't attend a single Friday of the first semester of school. I was never there. He would ask me on the Thursday if I was going to be there, and my answer would always be no, but we'll see. But I was never there. And that's pretty common. It just gets easy. And a lot of the senior teachers, they understand senioritis, so they assign less homework. And it's just a little easier to breeze by, I guess. Well, I think missing school's one of the biggest things of senioritis.
I think they have these senior skip days, don't they, where the whole of the senior group of people don't go into school on a particular day. I mean, you still had your college exam at the end of the year, and you passed that exam, which then exempted you from the college course. So it's not that you were doing no work. You weren't doing your 4 hours of homework every night. It was kind of a more relaxed, that final year, very much more relaxed year. And then you have your proms and all those other things which make up the rites of passage as you leave school.
I don't know. I think a lot of that stuff just sort of wasn't too relevant to me, but because my AP exams, my senior year of high school, were a little different because we had to take them online and nobody really cared if they passed or failed. Because it used to be a very high stress.
You took those exams during the time of COVID restrictions.
Yes. And so we didn't have to go and sit in a huge room where everybody was watching us for 4 hours. I sat in my bed and took the exam.
Okay. So which assessment system is better? The UK or the US? Here's daughter number 1 with her thoughts. And you were forming the assessment mechanism for your own country. Would you go for the US option of sort of regular testing, measuring everything for a 4-year period? or would you save it all for 2 exams at the end?
I would give students a choice. At university, I have had professors who basically allow students to choose their own adventure in terms of grading. Okay. So if you just want to take the final exam for that class and you don't want to take anything else, if you get a great grade on that final exam, they will ignore everything else. You don't have to turn up for a single test. Mm-hmm. So kids that do very well in the UK system, like you at university, that would have been, if you'd gone to university in the US, you would probably have failed out.
Right. Well, I possibly would have worked a bit harder.
Yes, but I mean, the way that you went to university is just not possible in the US. Mm-hmm. But you either take the final exam or you can take unit tests and that just be your exam and no final.
So you'd have a flexible and you would allow people to choose either one or the other.
Yes. Okay. And I don't see a problem with someone taking tests, not doing very well in the unit test, and then taking the final, doing a fantastic job.
Okay. For all of its faults, the US education system is very flexible compared to the UK system. Many millions of US students are home educated, a topic we will cover in a future episode. Even pre-COVID, millions more attend virtual school run by the state and county for students who can't or choose not to go to school. Finally, most states encourage or allow dual enrollment, where high school students attend local universities for some or all of their high school courses. Next time, in the third part of this series on education, we're going to talk about the icons of American school education. We may have seen them in 100 films and TV shows, but we're going to learn about the school bus, the high school prom, and driving to school.
Julian, it's probably fair to say that driving movies, a little bit like baseball, are quintessential American. And I have a confession to make, Julian. First of all, I've never been to one, not in the States. But I have tried to go to 2 this summer in the US at Kempton Park, at different movies.
In the UK?
In the UK. Moulin Rouge, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Ferris Bueller's Day Off. On both occasions, Lash with Rain didn't go. Tell me a little bit about your experience of going to drive-in movies in the States and why visitors should try and go to them if at all possible.
I should really start this by saying I am a very big fan of movies. I see about 100 a year, and I've seen 100 plus a year every year of my adult life. And I love seeing movies at the theatre rather than on my own television. I love movies. If you don't like movies as much as me, perhaps you'll like drive-in movies less than me. But I love the romance of a drive-in movie. I love being out there on a warm night, under the stars, the kids having the freedom to play around if they find the movie a bit boring. I love having the speakers either on the radio or maybe if it's a more traditional drive-in movie, having the speaker stands resting on my front window. I love the fact you can take the dog to the drive-in movie. I love the people who've arrived in their pickup and have put a mattress in the back of their pickup and are watching it with their loved one from the safety of the mattress in their pickup. I love the people who got out of the car and are sitting on lawn chairs and listening to it via their radio. I love the concessions. So yes, I love a lot about drive-in movies.
By the way, listeners, if you don't follow Julian on Facebook, you should do, because he regularly gives reviews of all the movies he sees. So, absolutely. Julian, is there a particular type of movie that goes well in a drive-in? My pick, when Joan said to me, let's go to the drive-in movie, I think her pick was Moulin Rouge, a musical. Don't like them, but probably the best one I like. And then I thought, well, of my favourite movies, comedy, that's probably going to go well in a drive-in movie. What do you think?
I think that maybe comedy wouldn't be the best one for a drive-in movie, because the thing about watching comedy in a movie theatre is that you enjoy it all the more because other people are laughing. And in a drive-in movie, you're less aware of other people at the movie theatre, just the people in your posse. For me, the best movie to see at a drive-in movie is probably a summer blockbuster, a Bond film, a Taken film, something where there's a lot of excitement that is probably, for me, the best type of movie to watch at a drive-in. Probably not some Russian film about the purpose of life or something. That probably would translate less well at a drive-in movie.
Okay. Now, one of the reasons why I don't go to movies, and probably need to check the name of this, but I understand there is a chain of cinemas in Texas that actually has very strict rules about people eating popcorn and being on their phones, and actually throws people out who do that. If you go, you have to watch. Now, in a drive-in movie, do you have the same irritations of the rest of the audience listening to you? Or are you in a position where you can literally watch it on your own without any disruptions for noise?
That's one of the great beauties of the drive-in movie. You can bring your own food in your car, or you can go and purchase at the concession stand. The rules aren't in place. If you really wanted to, you could be on your phone all the time because it wouldn't distract other people because they would be in their own vehicle. If you are the type of person who likes to eat their own food or text during the movie or tweet during the movie, then a drive-in movie would be ideal for you.
Or can we continue the theme of food? So you say people can bring the food. Now, which film, Julian, am I going to think about which features a drive-in movie? Any ideas, Julian? Set in the 50s?
Are you thinking about American Graffiti?
I am thinking of American Graffiti. Well done, read my mind. And who starred in that? Who went on to big things later on? No other than
Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford.
Richard Dreyfuss, didn't he? Was it Richard?
Richard Dreyfuss, he was also in it. Wasn't Harrison Ford in that movie as well?
I don't think so, Julian. But you're the expert. I'm not. I'm guessing. But in that film, famously, the shakes are delivered by the waitress on roller skates. Now, is that, again, just an American myth? If you buy food in your American movie, how is it delivered to you?
Well, actually, during a pandemic, we went back to the old ways where somebody would deliver the food to you, to your car, rather than you having to get it from the concession stand. But that was a short-term sort of pandemic measure. In most cases, there's a concession stand and you go to the concession stand either before or during the movie if you fancy something to eat. But they are talking in American Graffiti, which I haven't seen. I have to say I haven't seen that for 35 years. They are talking about the golden era of drive-in movies. As you probably know, you can't really have a drive-in movie unless you've got lots of cars. So the first drive-in movie was set up in 1933 in New Jersey. By the 1950s, there were 4,000 drive-in movie theatres. Today, only 325 remain. And actually, that's gone up a few because of the pandemic. You have seen a big change in Americans' viewing habits, something which was the place to take your date on a Friday or Saturday night in the 1950s or 1960s is now something which is something of a rarity. And that decline in popularity has been caused by many reasons, the most important being that people who own the drive-in movie theatre have sold the movie theatre because the land has become very valuable. The second is obviously VHS and digital projection. As those technologies changed, people preferred to watch it at home on their VHS or their DVD, or in the case of digital projection, many of the movies would not allow their movie to be shown without digital projection. And the cost of investing in digital projection was too high. And of course, there are lots of other forms of entertainment now. So the drive-in movie theatre is something of a rarity, 325 only in the US, with some states not having any drive-in movies at all. I'm pleased to say, where I am currently, which is South Carolina, there is a drive-in movie theatre within about 5 miles of where I am. As soon as there is something that I want to see at this drive-in movie theatre, I will be on my way there. And actually, one of the great things about drive-in movies is often you can see more than one film. So you'll see a double feature. So I'll have one at, say, 9 o'clock whenever it gets dark, and then one at, maybe 11:30. So you can see 2 movies for the price of 1 ticket.
Yes, and I'm old enough to remember the times when there was an A and a B screening of a film, Julian.
Right.
Going back to, in the UK, of course, we don't have a history of drive-in movies.
Do you remember the advent of sound and colour then, Michael?
Al Johnson, excellent guy. Really liked him. going back to the UK, we don't have a history of drive-in movies, as you know, but actually at the moment, open-air cinema, despite the British summer, has become very popular. All around London, parks are showing films. Having said that, you don't get new films. As I said earlier, Moulin Rouge and Ferris Bueller's Day Off has been very much sort of, it's films that you would like or want to see again. But a good experience if you can get there and it doesn't rain.
Movie companies are still not releasing most of their big movies quite yet. You know, we've had a few bigger releases, but most of the stuff which has been released in the early part of this summer has been fairly small fare. So that's part of the reason. I'm sure if people regularly got into drive-in movies in the UK, big movie companies would be happy for their film to be shown there. Certainly in the US, all the first releases are shown at the movie theatres.
Anything further to add on the drive-in movie?
Yeah, I got one other further thing to add, and that is that there are a number of them for sale at the moment, Michael. So should you want to purchase one, I think there are about a dozen of these 325 that are for sale. So if you had 500,000 to 2 million, which I imagine just depends really on the fundamental value of the land, you can purchase a drive-in movie from one of the owners who is retiring.
Okay. And you mentioned it in terms of people selling the land off. Have these things got sort of any form of protection as clearly they are institutions? Are the owners allowed to sell something that's been going for years?
I don't know. There may be one or two which have some protection, but in general there's no protection, which is why we've gone from 4,000 to 325 and why, you know, many people just don't have a drive-in movie close to them. Whereas in the 60s, there would have been, you know, every single town would have had at least one drive-in movie theatre. Yeah. And you would have had your roller skating people bringing the food to you and, you know, all of that entertaining stuff, which would be perfect for a date night.
So, yeah, you know, Julian, we both show an interest in economics and business. I suspect the ROI of property developing a drive-in movie lot is significantly higher than the return from showing films. That will only go one way, sadly.
I think that's exactly right.
So catch one before they disappear is our message. Julian, I've been doing some work preparing for my next trip to the States. I feel I've missed out because what I read, Philadelphia is definitely a place to go. I've not been, so not just for my benefit, but for listeners' benefits, just give us a guided tour of Philadelphia, what you should see and why you should go.
I went there recently. It was for the second time. I'd been there once before, very briefly on business, but this time I spent 4 days in Philadelphia. I think your experience of having not been there is pretty common. I will have met very few or relatively few British people who have been to Philadelphia. Even though it's only 2 hours from New York City, or a couple of hours from New York City and a couple of hours from DC, it is rarely visited by British people. And I think that's a real shame because it is an old city with a great history and heritage, and it has a lot to do and a lot to see. What I like about the city is that it is old and it is well preserved. As you probably know, Philadelphia was the original capital of the United States. Did you know that, Michael?
I did.
Much of the American Revolution was plotted and planned there. Got all of that history, and also, despite the capital having moved to DC, also the newer stuff that they put in the city is also very attractive as well. But unlike New York, the roads in Philadelphia are wider and the vistas therefore are more enticing and more attractive. Like New York and like Chicago, it is a city where people actually live rather than just travel to. So that's the other thing which makes the city attractive, because that's where everyone's home is as well. They have 99 museums, which would take a long time to see each of those museums. I saw just 3 while I was there, and they were great museums. So I saw the Museum of American Revolution. I saw the Barnes Collection, which is a museum essentially of Impressionist paintings. there was a collector called Barnes who collected Impressionist paintings, and he left all of the paintings to the city of Philadelphia. A couple of hundred of Renoir, for example. If you like Impressionist paintings, it must be one of the best museums in the world for Impressionist paintings. And I also saw the Independence Hall, which is where the Declaration of Independence and where the US Constitution was debated and approved. Museums, 99 of them. If you like museums, there's bound to be one to your taste.
So can I ask you a question? Did you go to the Museum of Art?
I did not. There's a Philadelphia Museum of Art, which I didn't go to. I had a choice between going to the Philadelphia Museum of Art or watching the Euros final. I foolishly selected watching the Euros final.
Yeah, but you know why it's famous? Now, do you know why it's famous? And you're a movie man, so you should know why it's really famous. Because it's not what's in it that counts.
Is it got the steps for the Rocky?
Absolutely. So if you Google it, that's what comes up. So that's the number one. See, and I've got four things, one of which was the steps from Rocky, that I want to ask your opinion of, which you have not yet mentioned. The first one is the Liberty Bell. Okay?
Yes.
Now, you last time tried to get me to sing a song, did you not, Julian? You remember previous episode?
I do remember, and I remember you steadfastly refusing to sing that song.
So what song is associated with the Liberty Bell?
Oh, actually, I don't know the answer to that question, so...
The Liberty Bell March. Now, I was going to ask you to hum it, but obviously you've not heard of it, have you?
Never heard of it, so...
My father was big into Sousa, and it's basically a brass band guy, and the Liberty Bell March is one of his things. So that's the first thing. The second thing is...
Can we talk about the Liberty Bell for a second? It's really the symbol of the city, and I mean, I asked a number of people, including the guy who took our walking tour. No one could really give me a good reason why it is the symbol of the city. They instructed a company in London, actually it was the same company that produced Big Ben, the bell in the House of Commons Tower. They built this Liberty Bell. And they also built, I think, up to, well, no one's really quite sure. I think there were maybe 7 of them built. And this bell broke. And then they got somebody to repair it, and then that also broke. They've got the cracked bell on display kind of in the heart of Philadelphia. And I know it was supposed to be struck when important matters happened in America. But I don't really understand why it is so famed, because it really is a faulty bell produced by some dodgy East End company in London.
So it's not wrong to signify, or it wasn't ever wrong to signify important events? No?
Yeah, it hasn't been rung that many times, and I can't remember now. Somebody did tell me what the last time it was rung. But... yeah, it's basically a faulty bell, and I don't really understand why a city would want a faulty bell to be its symbol.
Okay, so my third one, the second here, is in our last episode, Julian, you I'm afraid, and we've had listener complaints, you insulted Chicagoans, if that's the word, and their pizza pie. You remember that? You remember you said you weren't very
I do, yeah.
You weren't very complimentary.
Yeah.
So do you know what Philadelphia is famous for when it comes to the culinary steaks? And are you going to be complimentary this time?
As you know, I'm a vegetarian. So I didn't partake of this particular dish myself. But my wife, who always insists on eating the local speciality.
I know that.
We went to a fantastic market called the Reading Terminal Food Market, where they had, 100 different food vendors. And she got a Philadelphia cheesesteak. Is that what you're talking about, Michael?
That was exactly what I was talking about.
So I had my nice Chinese food, which was lovely. And she had the Philadelphia cheesesteak, which, from what I can see, was cheese mixed with beef mince. And she said it was disgusting. So, I don't know. It's all meat, and meat is murder, but, I didn't have it.
So you're no longer welcome in Chicago. And Lorna now is no longer welcome in Philadelphia. Okay.
Right. But Philadelphia is a great eating city.
Good.
Not only is it an attractive place to be, they've got 2 major rivers which run through it. And so they've got quite a lot of waterfront, and they've got many local neighborhoods, serving the people who live there. Outdoor eating is all the rage, and certainly in the summer months, a great place to go for food. Maybe not quite as diverse as New York, but plenty of diversity and a great place to eat and drink. I did a walking tour as well. The historic area is relatively small, and a historian took us around the walking tour, and I learned a lot about how the US rebellion grew, and I learned a lot about Benjamin Franklin, who sounded like a really super cool guy. What do you know about Benjamin Franklin, Michael?
Not sufficient to say a lot on this podcast.
Okay, yeah. So he was a real Renaissance man. He was a scientist, he was an inventor, he was a politician, he was a businessman, he was a writer, and he excelled at all of those things, and he was obviously something of a wit as well. And what made him actually particularly famous, at a time when most people died in their 40s, he doubled that lifespan. So he had a lot more experience than most of the people around him, and was able to impart that experience on a new nation. Yeah, walking tour, very recommended there. Museums recommended. Great place to eat and drink. Did you had a third question?
Oh, I had a last one. Do you know what Mummers is? Mummer. I'd never heard of it.
No. Never heard of it.
Well, it's obviously their attempt to rival New York. Mummers Parade is the New Year's Day parade they do. And it's one of the 4 things in Wikipedia associated with Philadelphia, with the Bell, with the Museum of Art and Rocky, and with the cheesesteaks. Mummers Parade.
Yeah, and I would say, if I was making a criticism about Philadelphia, if I wanted to alienate listeners from that city further, I would say that I am a little bit annoyed by their inferiority complex with New York City, to an extent with DC as well. Certainly our walking guide and a number of other people mentioned to me, we're as good as New York City. And I think that shows a little lack of confidence. I don't think they need to mention New York City. I mean, New York City is a much bigger city. It's got a broader cultural palette. But for me, Philadelphia is a really good city. If you've been to New York City, then you should also go to Philadelphia. People would find Philadelphia a much gentler city. They'll find less hassle in the city. It's much cheaper, and it's therefore more convenient. It's got great history. In fact, probably better history than New York in a way. And so I would strongly recommend it for your list for when you next come to the US, Michael.
So I'd like to change the scoring system this time, Julian. So
Yeah.
and we know we like football. So is it a top 5, top 6 Premiership side? Is it mid-table aspiring to be a Premiership? Or is it sadly barely keeping afloat to stay within the Premiership? Where are you going to position it?
I think it's in the middle. I was going to say it's a 4-star place, but really I'm in 5-star. You should go there. It's great. In your new system, it would be a side like Everton. No danger of being relegated at all. They're not going to qualify for Europe because there are sort of bigger, more exciting cities around. 4 days is probably about the right amount of time. You won't see everything in that time, but you'll get a good idea of the place in that type of time frame.
So what I'm taking from it, it's worth visiting, but really depends where you've been previously. So if you've done the top 5, then it's definitely on the watch list. If you haven't, then stick with the top 5.
Yeah, if you haven't been to New York, go to New York over Philadelphia. If you've been to New York, maybe a couple of times or something, then go to Philadelphia. You'll have a great time.
How does it compare with Boston?
I don't know Boston as well. I've been there, but I haven't been there. I haven't spent a lot of time in Boston. I'm going to annoy and alienate our listeners from Boston now. I would choose Philadelphia over Boston, I think.
Or maybe in another edition, we can look at Boston because it has lots of history, doesn't it? And yeah, so I'd be interested to do a comparison between the two.
Yes. Yeah, they may be actually somewhat comparable. In your Premier League model, maybe both of them are cities somewhere in the middle.
That's all we have time for today, folks, to coin a phrase. Thank you very much for listening. Let me give you a trailer for what's coming up. We will be continuing the series on education because we think that's got lots of legs. We're going to do a national park. Julian and I have both been to Yellowstone Park, so we're going to talk about that and why you should visit. And then the iconic status of American TV. And I'm in particular going to be looking at how it influences British culture. Until next time, thank you for listening. Please, please, please recommend it to your friends and give us a 5-star rating on your favourite podcast. I'm afraid they don't do a version of Premiership, Championship ratings. 5-star will do. So until the next time, take care, have fun.
How US-centric was your US education?
Yeah, so I think that my education in the US was more US-centric than it would have been in the UK.
Right.
But this is a particularly embarrassing moment, which does happen to be in the book as well. But I did not...
And that's the book, High, Wide and Handsome.
Yes.
What's the difference between a quiz and a test?
Well, tests are worth much more, and especially in some of the higher level classes, the tests, you would only have 4 tests.
Okay.
So if you fail 1, it's not looking too good. Or, I guess if they just thought that their child was really dumb, they could just wait it out another year and see if they got any brighter. But I don't think that ever worked, to be honest. Well, we have these tests that are, I guess, kind of equivalent to a A-level.
No, not in any way.
Okay, never mind.
But do we not want to give upcoming items other than the education?
Yeah, I don't know that I've got them. We could put them in place. What do we want to do? Okay. We got... What about doing a national park? Which national park do you want to do?
Yellowstone. Oh, yeah, more. I can do Yosemite. Better, Yellowstone.
Let's do Yellowstone.
Yeah. We're on a roll on American culture, aren't we? So, movies, motels, what else would we...
American fridges?
American fridges. Okay, yeah.
American dream? Drug advertising? What makes New York vote Democrat?
Now, let's do that. What about TV?
Yeah, I haven't got TV on the list. Let's do TV. American TV.
Yeah. So Yellowstone and American TV. Yellowstone and American TV. Yellowstone and American TV. Yellowstone and American TV. Yellowstone and American TV.